So there's been a lot of talk with Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and the sales expectations of these games. And I think that this recent statement is only going to fuel the fire for whether or not these games actually did in fact meet expectations. And the reason I say that is because Square Enix has put out one of their financial reports today, and it has this sentence here about their HD games subsegment. And here is what the statement says. Here are our digital entertainment segment results. In the HD games subsegment, we released multiple new titles, including major titles such as Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, but profits unfortunately did not meet our expectations. Profits unfortunately did not meet our expectations. That has people talking. Now, of course, there's been two ways in which people are reading this statement. The first way that people are reading it is Final Fantasy 16 and Rebirth didn't meet expectations. The second way that people have been reading it, they had a lot of other games that came out in the HD games division, such as the notorious hit Foam Stars. I'm pretty sure everyone here is a very big fan of Foam Stars. You may have heard of Foam Stars. It is the game of the year 2024. I don't think it even comes close. Astrobot, stand down, please. The big question here, which one of those is it? I have a third different interpretation of it, as I always do, because I am always kind of reading things a little bit different than a lot of other people are. So the way I kind of read into this statement is essentially that Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth probably did not meet expectations. They probably were profitable in some sense, but that still was not enough to cover for all the other failures that they had. However, I do think that they would not be talking about reevaluating their exclusivity deal if everything was going okay and according to plan, right? That's what you do when things did not meet expectations. There probably was some dissatisfaction with the sales performance of these games. Not only that, there's also been industry analysts who have basically said that they don't think that the games really performed the way they did. Let me see if I can actually pull that up. So if you look at what Daniel Ahmad was saying, is that he said, this is one of the rare cases where Square Enix is being reasonable, as both games really did underperform compared to past entries. And Daniel Ahmad, again, very respected industry analyst. So I don't think this is just maybe me reading into it too much, or, you know, people reading the sentence wrong. I do think that it's reading both ways. I do think if you go back and look at it, it's essentially saying that, you know, these two probably didn't do what they were supposed to do. And also, you know, we had a lot of other failures in the meantime. And yeah, that's why HD game subsegment is the way that it is. And that's another thing to talk about, is that David Tyler here says, well, a lot of AAA titles are suffering. That's another part of it too, is that a lot of this is a symptom of AAA, right? In AAA titles suffering, right? Like AAA is not in a good place. And so in some cases, or I should say in some ways, it's not just a problem with Final Fantasy specifically, as it is, you know, kind of an industry-wide problem too. Frosty here saying, something interesting about Night Sky Prince, out of all the major Japanese companies, only Square Enix has been going PlayStation exclusive. Two massive studios at the moment from Japan are Capcom and FromSoft, both being multi-plat and building on years of success going back 1 or 2 console gens. FF does not have the same success these days. SE just isn't making AAA money to be making so many AAA games, and live services flop left and right. Hell, going PS exclusive in Japan right now doesn't seem smart either. You're right. They're not doing that. They're not doing that, and I don't know what the thought process is there, right? Because clearly they're not satisfied with it. However, with that being said, they have announced that going forward, they do want to bring these games to multi-platform. However, I think when we talk about multi-platform, you know, it's hard to talk about multi-platform without talking about the fact that Xbox is not doing particularly great this generation. I know there are some Xbox fans out there that probably, you know, don't want to hear that statement, but yeah, Xbox is not doing particularly great. When we talk about multi-platform, however, I do think, to me, What multi-platform really means is being on PC day one, right? So one of the things that we talked about in previous discussions is that Capcom, half of Capcom's profit comes from PC. Half. Which means you have to add up all the consoles together, right? To get Capcom's PC performance. Capcom is doing that well on PC. FromSoft also does really, really well on PC as well. So they're both doing really well on PC. And the fact that Square Enix is not on PC day one, right? Think about how huge the success of Final Fantasy 16 would have been on PC day one if people could have played that, right? There's only so many platforms that can really play these big HD games, and I do think that PC is one of them. And not only is PC one of them too, you guys also got to think about Steam Deck, right? And so, you know, you have millions of people that are also playing games on their Steam Deck. Steam Deck has become a paradigm shift for me personally, right? Like, if I can play a game on PlayStation, or I can get a game for Steam and play it on Steam Deck, I'm going to get it on Steam Deck, right? I'm going to get it on Steam, like, every time. When Persona 3 Reload came out, you know, I could have got that game on PS5, but guess what? I decided to get that game on Steam because I could also play Persona 3 Reload on my Steam Deck. I would have synced cloud saves, and I'd be able to play it both on my PC in HD, and I could play it on the go. And, you know, honestly, I don't think I would have been able to get through Reload without it because Persona games are so long. It's just really hard to be able to sit and find the time to play through all of them. But when you have that on Steam Deck, it's really easy. Crossy again saying, I said to you privately, Xbox could potentially go the way of Sega in 1 or 2 gens at this rate. I wholeheartedly believe that. I think that they're going the way of Sega next gen, bro. Like, I think we may have like some Xbox hardware next gen, but I think that I believe the rumors that they would try to do like a Game Pass portable, like an Xbox on the go, because that's the only thing I think makes sense for them. I don't think it makes sense for Xbox to do another traditional game box in the way that like a PlayStation 6 would be, because I don't think that there is a market for it. I think that Xbox has been trending downward for a really long time. I do think that's unfortunate, by the way. Let's not play console wars here, because I'm definitely not. I do not think that Sony not having competition is a good thing. I think that that is inherently bad. We all know how bad it is when these companies do not have competition. Things do not go good when there is not a competitor to pressure them to keep prices reasonable, to continue to make the best games that they can. When that happens, it's like, where else are you going to go? You have to game with us. And we saw the peak of Sony arrogance with the PlayStation 3. PlayStation 2 dominated so hard that Sony thought nobody could ever even think about touching them. Because of that, they made the PlayStation 3 $600 system. And they even said things like, you're going to want to work 2 jobs in order to play a PlayStation 3. But that's exactly what happens when you have no competition. Who is going to stop you? Nobody. And yeah, even though Nintendo is technically a competitor, Nintendo is not really a competitor in a direct way, right? Like, for the most part, it's not like my Switch necessarily means I won't buy a PlayStation, right? Because it's 2 different sets of games. And for most gamers, they're going to get a Switch and a PlayStation, right? Like, it's hard for me to imagine me only owning a Nintendo console. Personally, that would not be a thing I would be able to do. Because I like other games. I don't just like Nintendo stuff. Like, I do like Nintendo stuff. But Nintendo first party is not enough to sustain me, right? Like, if the Switch could reasonably play Elden Ring, maybe it would be feasible for gamers to only own a Switch, right? All of this is to say, I do think that Square Enix does need to start putting these games out on PC day one. I think that is the biggest thing that they could probably do to change things around from where they currently are. A lot of people would ask me, like with Final Fantasy 16 in particular, but also with Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, right? Because a lot of my friends, they'll see Final Fantasy games, they'll ask me about it because they know what I do. And a lot of the times they'll be like, oh, I don't have a PS5 yet. Can I pick it up on PC? I've gotten asked that question like a dozen times when these games were coming out. And I would have to tell them, oh, no, dude, I'm sorry. It's not coming to PC. And again, with Final Fantasy 16 in particular, I swear to you, I got asked a dozen times, is Final Fantasy 16 coming to PC? I want to play it on PC. I got asked so many times about it. And of course, now it is officially out on PC. But it was really clear to me at that time that a lot of people were like, I haven't upgraded to PS5 yet. I just want to play it on PC, and they couldn't do it. Man, 16 is trash on PC. That's another thing too. They need to put out good PC ports. This has been a huge problem for a really long time. They need to put out good PC ports. Being on PC day one is not good enough if, the fans are going to have to fix it. Because the thing about PC is always the best place to play. But the problem with PC is that it's not always the best place to play on day one. With the Final Fantasy 16 PC port, to have an opinion on it, by the way, so I can't really tell you. I've heard some mixed things. Some people seem to be fine with it, some people aren't. The 30 FPS cap can be fixed with a mod already. People have already fixed that. Ultra-wide support can also be fixed. Because the game, by the way, does support ultra-wide. It just is not enabled in the actual game. Like, there's no setting for it. But if you go in and tweak the settings, like with like a config file, like you can actually enable ultra-wide on Final Fantasy 16 and it runs just fine. Yeah, like it's a mod, and it's a mod that people were able to make in the demo. It's one of those things where if fans were able to come in and use the demo, not have the source code, fix a couple of config files, dude, and fix the 30 FPS limit, fix the lack of ultra-wide, why couldn't you do that? Why couldn't you, the developer with access to the source code, do that? How was someone able to do that, basically with the demo, right? Because that's where they started modding this. And it all runs fine. It all runs just fine. Square has to get it together, man, on this type of stuff. They really do. And when it comes to the profit expectations here, what it comes down to is that regardless of whether Final Fantasy 16 or Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth were very profitable titles or not, the HD Games division did not see a profit. And if they were profitable in a tremendous way, this still kind of is what is going on with management, right? Like, what is going on with a lot of the decisions that are happening? At some point, something is being tremendously mismanaged, right? So if these titles are profitable and HD Games as a whole is not, then it really says you guys are like effing up somewhere in the pipeline. Whether it's creating titles like Foam Stars, which I think we all agree, objectively a bad decision, right? There's no arguing against that. And then when it comes to putting out these titles too, again, they're not available on PC day one. And I think that is just a huge L. And honestly too, if they could make them available for Switch 2, now I don't know if Switch 2 will be able to run Final Fantasy 16 or Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth. It's hard to imagine Switch 2 being able to run Final Fantasy 16 in particular, because the Steam Deck currently cannot run Final Fantasy 16 at a stable 30. Maybe if the devs go in there and they're able to scale down the game, they could get it running on Steam Deck and maybe even running on Switch 2. I don't know. But really, the only reason I emphasize a Switch 2 port for these games is because that would do really well in Japan. Japan would definitely buy these games on Switch. But right now, the PlayStation market is just not there in Japan. Resident Evil 4 got like 168 concurrent players on PC day one. Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm talking about, man. Like, Capcom is doing phenomenally well on PC. And Square Enix is ignoring PC. They're putting out half-baked PC ports a year to a year and a half later. I do think that there is a brand problem with Final Fantasy. Like, there's a brand problem. You cannot describe what type of game Final Fantasy is anymore. You can't do it. And that's not to say that they shouldn't try to innovate and try new things. I actually think that's still a strength of Final Fantasy. But it can't just be like a random thing each time. And I think that that's what they've been doing, is that each time it's a different thing, like entirely different thing, right? And I don't think that was the case when you look at their most successful era of games, which was 1 through 10, right? Where Final Fantasy was a very consistent, very well-defined thing, and those games are still praised and loved to this day. Like, so I don't think, in my view, the solution is to just keep doing like the random thing. I think the reason they keep doing the quote-unquote random thing is because they haven't found something that really sticks yet, right? They thought that Final Fantasy XIII's combat would kind of be like the new ATB system that would kind of replace the kind of classic ATB system and sort of be like this new evolution of what the classic system would be. And while I do think that 13's command synergy system is a bit underrated, I don't think it ended up being received as well as it needs to be in order to like replace what the classic turn-based system was. CPU1 though was then able to kind of evolve that into Final Fantasy VII Remake's combat, because that's kind of the next evolution of what command synergy was, you know, building up an ATB bar and then unleashing it. And that combat has done really well, I think. And so I think that they should continue to stick with that. I think it allows for all the Final Fantasy expectations that we talk about to stick around, because that's one of the things that has kind of fell off in the later years, is that the things that people expect from a Final Fantasy game are no longer present, right? Like if you talk about airships in a world map, and you talk about ATB and being able to control party members and all this stuff, all the things that people want from a Final Fantasy game, and that, like, for the most part, the first 10 games provided, minus 10 having a world map, you know? People get really excited about that stuff. And the reason they get excited about it is because those are the things that people kind of like foundationally expect and crave from Final Fantasy. It's the things that they want Final Fantasy to be, right? And I can just mention those things in a new Final Fantasy game in a video, and the excitement explodes, right? Like seeing party members, seeing a world map. People still want those things, right? I don't think that remakes are really the big paradigm shift that's going to get like a ton of people in. I think what they need to do is create Final Fantasy 17 and really knock it out of the park and have it available on every platform that will support it on day one. I think that's what it really is. Because I genuinely believe that if Square Enix made Final Fantasy 17 and it played like Rebirth, right, where it had like a world map and it had party members that you can control, and it had like all these different towns and cities and a ton of side quests and things to do, I think that if you launched that with a brand new story and brand new characters, and it would be something that anyone can access from day one, I think that would have sold like, 10 million copies lifetime. I think it would have done really, really well. I think it would have blown up. Because the whole time I was playing Rebirth, I couldn't help but think, why isn't this Final Fantasy 17? And I love FF7, right? Like, I love FF7. But I couldn't help but think, the volume of content, the quality of the game, the world map, all these things. As I was looking at it, I was like, why have we not got a numbered FF title that has had all these things that people have been asking for over a decade? And it's all here in this title. And of course it's here in this title because it's a remake. It has to be there. But it's modernized so well. It's done so well. The volume of content is so big. And I just could not understand why the decision to make a game like this was done with just a remake of Final Fantasy VII and hasn't been the course of direction for Final Fantasy for a while now, right? Like it's kind of mind-blowing to me. I think that it's hard to ignore that as a question. And that's not to say that Rebirth is perfect or that Rebirth couldn't use like some changes, or Rebirth couldn't be better in like a few aspects, because I think it could be. But like Rebirth is like the right direction. It's the right, like, it's like go north. Well, Rebirth is north, right? It may not be like the northmost thing, but it's like it's the right direction. It's the way they're supposed to be going, and it just blows my mind that it took remaking FF7 to just figure out that people actually, you know, people really liked classic Final Fantasy, and they just want you to try to modernize classic Final Fantasy. Hell, a lot of them don't even want you to modernize classic. They just straight up want a traditional turn-based, you know, world map game. And I understand why they're not actually trying to make that. However, I do think that people still want the FF conventions, right? Like, people still want a world map, an airship, party members. I think whatever they make next has to incorporate those things. And I'm saying this specifically from the perspective of an FF content creator. Like, I see excitement go up and down based on these things. I read the comments. I see what people are saying. Every time party members become playable, or more than one character becomes playable, people go nuts. People go nuts. They love it. They love it. And every time party members are not playable, it becomes the discourse of the game for the entirety of the game's life cycle, right? Final Fantasy 15, right? Remember when it was advertised that you'd be able to play as all the characters? Holy crap, man. People were outraged. Outraged. When the game came out and, like, you couldn't do it. 15 got so much more lovable when they became playable. I got so much more love when they became playable, sorry. Yeah, like, then all of a sudden people were like, oh yeah, I should give 15 a second chance. Because now all the party members are playable. And people started to really love it. Yeah, I don't get it after 15 how CBU3 doubled down on it for 16. I think that was, like, kind of crazy, right? That they did do that, because I think that, like, 15 got so much flack for doing it. It was kind of weird that they doubled down on it. 15 got so much hate for it, dude. 15 got so much hate. And I think that a lot of people actually would have moved the needle for how they felt on 16 if you were able to control Jill, or if you were able to control Joshua or Dion. I think for a lot of people, that would have been like if people would have gave, like, 16 like an 8, I feel like they would have gave it like an 8.5 or 9 if they could control all the characters. Square needs more IPs developed by them, not their Western studios or live service. I feel like they are hard focusing on making their value directors continue to make sequels, spin-offs, or of other already existing franchises. How many people have you encountered asking or assuming they've already played previous FFs to understand the current ones? Yeah, 100%, 100%. You know, I get that asked to me every time, like, casual friends were like, oh, I'm thinking about making, you know, 16 my first one, or 17 my first, or sorry, 7R my first one. And, you know, they'll ask me, do I need to know anything? Play them. And I'll just be like, no, just go ahead and play them. But it's interesting that a lot of casuals do think that, and they've talked about maybe, you know, dropping the numbers that people don't have to, like, think about it. Personally, I'm neither here nor there with that. I think that people can understand numbers. I don't think the numbers is really going to make a tremendous amount of difference. Like, you know, Resident Evil's done it with Village, but it's just so hard for me to say, because the other side of dropping the number is also dropping the importance, like the significance. So numbers kind of are good in a way. It's why we've never had, like, PlayStation come out with, like, oh, this is a bad thing, right? Like, in fact, you know what's funny? The only time PlayStation's ever had a failed console is when they broke the number. So when we had PSP and they went with PlayStation Vita instead of PSP2, that's the only time we've had a failed console from Sony. So I do believe in the power of the number, but I also understand that the number can, like, inherently gatekeep, or create a barrier, I should say, from the user wanting to pick something up. It's really hard for me to say, like, is the number a good thing or not? I don't know. I really don't know. I think that they should experiment with it. They should make Final Fantasy 17 a thing like Village, where it's still, you know, Resident Evil 8, so it'd still be Final Fantasy 17. The name wouldn't have to be in there, but they can, like, minimize the number and see what that does to sales, right? See what that does for the marketing. And yeah, just experiment. If it doesn't work, then just call the next game Final Fantasy 18, and then retroactively call the game Final Fantasy 17. That's what I would do. I would like dip my toe halfway into it in such a way that all the hardcore people that need it to be called 17, in the same way that all the hardcore Resident Evil fans who need Resident Evil 8 to be called Resident Evil 8, it's still Resident Evil 8 for them, but it's also Resident Evil Village for, like, you know, the regular guy going to pick up the latest Resident Evil game because he thought it looked cool. So, I don't know. I think that this is going to lead to a good point for Square. I want us to leave off on this topic in an optimistic way. I do think that we are going to see the Capcom era for Square Enix, and by that I mean kind of the next renaissance, I guess. Probably a terrible wrong word for it, but I do think that we're going to see an improvement in Square going forward. However, I also think that it is going to come with some pains, and it's going to come with them hitting some low points, and I think that this is the low point. I think that things are going to look up from here. I really do trust Kiryu-san, the new CEO. I think he's been talking a lot of things that make really good sense to me. I think that he knows what he's doing. I think the fact that they are not as obsessed with continuing their Sony exclusivity contracts is a very good thing. I think that that's smart. They also need to be on PC day one. There is just no excuse for them not to be on PC day one. It is probably the biggest flaw in their strategies. If anything, they should negotiate a contract with Sony that allows them to be on PC day one and just have console exclusivity to the latest PlayStation. At the very least, right? Like PS5 and PC. I think that's good. That's acceptable. But I don't think it's acceptable to only have it on PlayStation 5 anymore, right? Because clearly that has not been working out for them.